Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight is Dao De Jing. We'll be covering verses 52 and 53. For those of you that would like to share the version that most spoke to you, just type exclamation point in the chat and we'll get started from there. Or I could, okay, Mike, thanks for being the brave one. Mike, then Brian.
Okay, tonight I am reading from translation by Yi-Ping Ong, verse 52. All things have a beginning, which we can regard as their mother. Knowing the mother, we can know its children. Knowing the children, yet still cleaving to the mother, you can die without pain. Stop up the holes, shut the doors, you can finish your life without anxiety. Open the doors, increase your involvements. In the end, you can't be helped. Seeing the subtle is called illumination. Keeping flexible is called strength. Use the illumination, but return to the light. Don't bring harm to yourself. This is called practicing the eternal.
Thanks, Mike. And who was that again?
It's by Yi-Ping Ong.
Okay, thank you. Great. So next up we have Brian, or Penny actually, followed by Madeline, followed by Margarita, and then Laura.
This is the J.H. MacDonald version. The world had a beginning, which we call the Great Mother. Once we have found the mother, we begin to know what her children should be. When we know we are the mother's child, we begin to guard the qualities of the mother in us. She will protect us from all danger, even if we lose our life. Keep your mouth closed and embrace a simple life, and you will live carefree until the end of your days. If you try to talk your way into a better life, there will be no end to your trouble. To understand the small is called clarity. Knowing how to yield is called strength. To use your inner light for understanding, regardless of the danger, is called depending on the constant.
Thank you, Penny. Next up, I have Madeline. Welcome, Aman.
Thank you.
Okay, I have the Chow Fu Feng and Jane English translation. The beginning of the universe is the mother of all things. Knowing the mother, one also knows the sons. Knowing the sons, yet remaining in touch with the mother, brings freedom from the fear of death. Keep your mouth shut. Guard the senses, and life is ever full. Open your mouth, always be busy, and life is beyond hope. Seeing the small is insight. Yielding to force is strength. Using the outer light, return to insight, and in this way be saved from harm. This is learning constancy.
Thank you, Madeline. Next up, I have Margarita.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
I'm going to read Bahasa Indonesia. Di dalam alam semesta ini ada pokok permulaan. Ia disebut ibu dari alam. Setelah mengetahui sang ibu, maka mengenal juga sang anak. Setelah mengenal sang anak, kemudian menjaga sang ibu. Selama hidupnya terhindar dari kesukaran. Menutup mulutnya dan menutup pintunya, selama hidupnya dirinya tak mengalami kesibukan. Membuka mulutnya dan senantiasa mendapatkan banyak perkara, selama hidupnya tak dapat ditolong. Barang siapa yang dapat melihat dari mulut yang kecil dikatakan bijaksana, gunakan sinar terang untuk kembali pada penerangan, tidak menjadikan bencana bagi dirinya, inilah ketentraman abadi. Thank you.
Thank you. So next up, I have David, followed by Allison.
Okay, great, thanks. I was just trying to decide which one to read. I think I'll try Lao tonight. The world has a beginning, and this beginning could be the mother of the world. When you know the mother, go on to know the child. Go back to holding fast to the mother, and to the end of your days, you will not meet with danger. Block the openings, shut the doors, and all your life will not run dry. Unblock the openings, add to your troubles, and to the end of your days, you will be beyond salvation. To see the small is called discernment. To hold fast to the submissive is called strength. Use the light, but give up the discernment. Bring not misfortune upon yourself. This is known as following the constant.
Thank you, David. So next up, I have Allison. And for those of you that just joined us, type exclamation point in the chat if you wish to share your favorite version of verse 52.
This is the the Sam Tarot version. When creation began, as Dao became the world's mother. When you know your mother, you also know that you are her child. When you recognize that you are a child, you will stay close to your mother so she can keep you safe. Those who watch their mouths and guard their actions will be free from trouble to the end of life. Those who babble and meddle in others' business cannot escape from trouble, even in the end of life. To recognize your insignificance is empowering. To show sympathy is strength. Those who follow the Tao's light arrive at enlightenment.
Thank you, Allison. And I'm going to read from Ursula Le Guin. And hers is titled Back to the Beginning. The beginning of everything is the mother of everything. Truly to know the mother is to know her children. And truly to know the children is to turn back to the mother. The body comes to its ending, but there is nothing to fear. Close the openings, shut the doors, and to the end of life, nothing will trouble you. Open the openings, be busy with business, and to the end of life, nothing can help you. Insight sees the insignificant. Strength knows how to yield. Use the ways light return to its insight. That's how to practice, and so keep from going too far. That's how to practice what's forever. I thought Laura actually wanted to read, but she went off camera. So Aman, would you like me to share Jason's version? Maybe
Do you have it
I-
on screen share, or?
Let me see. Yes, I think
Because I have 52, 53 isn't in a final version, but I can.
Oh, it isn't. Okay, let me see if
I mean, the version I have isn't, but I do have 52, and I can share my screen if I think that shouldn't be too difficult.
Okay, I did enable it, so.
Let me just make sure. Okay. Let's see, can everyone see the mess that is my screen?
Absolutely.
All right, and that's 53. Give me 1 second. And here we go.
Oh, cool.
The world has its own beginning, which is regarded as the mother of the world. From the mother, you can understand her son, that being the world. After knowing the son, the world, you still need to embrace the mother again. In this way, your lives can be away from dangers. Closing apertures and shutting gates, you would not face hard life through your lives. Opening apertures and increasing activities, you would not be safe through your lives. To see the small is to be enlightened. To keep supple is to be strong. Use light to be enlightened. You won't lose yourself to danger. This is how to continue to employ the unchanging law. And since I'm showing how the sausage is made a little bit, let me go up here. See if I can find the version. This is the not everyone has actually seen this, but this is kind of the process Jason and I go through when we're doing these. I receive a translation from him, and then I will offer edits, and he'll come out with a final version, and I'll sometimes offer some commentary. And so it's, I don't think, quite as polished as it typically is, but I noticed in the shared doc, he has more of a version that has some of the suggestions I made, particularly in the last couple of lines. Let me just read through this other version, since I'm not sure where in between these two it will finally fall. But the world has its own beginning, which is regarded as the mother. From the mother, you can understand her son. After knowing the son, you again need to embrace the mother. You can come to embody freedom from dangers. Closing apertures and shutting gates, a long life is not hard-lived. Opening apertures and the busy rush of life leaves you unsafe throughout your life. In seeing the small, one may be enlightened. To keep supple is to be strong. Use light to be enlightened. You won't lose yourself to danger. This is how to don the dragon's cloth and employ the unchanging law. So you can see there's some differences between sort of the final version that he says he settled on in our email and the two versions that he's got in the shared doc. There are some idiosyncratic things about this particular passage that make it really challenging to translate from Chinese to English. But I do think that from the other translations I've heard, much of the same sentiment comes across through it. But yeah, that's the version as it stands so far. Thank you.
No, and thank you for sharing that. Now, folks, everybody, it's time for takeaways. So if you type exclamation point in the chat, Madeline, and to share what you've taken away from this particular verse.
First, I would like to hear Aman tell us about the dragon at the end.
I was so proud of that. He was so unfond of it. However, let me see if I can find it here. There's a particular word. Oh, I have had a rushed and busy day, so you will all have to forgive me. And my computer did not want to have internet connection today for whatever sick reason.
I can try and share if you need to. I think
no, I'm just looking to see if I can find my etymologies. I'm sorry about that.
Sure.
I'm ill-prepared today. One of the words which Jason translates as employ, the unchanging law, that word is made up of the character for dragon and clothing or cloth. And employ doesn't quite grasp the meaning of it entirely. It's a very good choice, but it's not absolute. I once again was trying to find a way to split differences and be able to say, here's a way that we can use both of these interpretations and possibly get something that reads still very coherently. And I really did like that term. Here it is. Sorry, the term she is what I was talking about, and I can share that with you here. If you give me one moment, I'll put it in the chat. This is the character in question, and how it is made up is of these two characters. and it can be translated as employ, but it also generally is understood to mean the word attack. It can also be used to mean inherit, and some of the etymology of that classic terminology, the dragon's cloth, is a euphemism for funerary robes, the undergarments that were placed on a corpse when it was being buried were sometimes called the shi, or the dragon cloth. I do think there are layers of meaning to that word selection in this particular chapter, but like I've said many a time, this is Jason's project as much as anything. My advice is worth as much as it's costing him. So hopefully that answers your question, Madeline.
Thank you for that, Amon. Madeline, do you want to continue to speak about your takeaway, or? I guess not. So folks, type exclamation point in the chat for your takeaway on this particular verse. What does everybody think about this this either mother-son or mother relationship with nature? I can ask maybe. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Mon, thanks.
Sorry to keep you waiting in the lurch.
That's
I
okay.
wasn't joking when I said it's been a strange and interesting weekend. I found out I'm going to be a grandfather. So,
Oh, congratulations. Wow.
thank you. The allusion to the mother, it harkens all the way back to chapter 1. The
Right.
Tao is the mother of all things.
Right.
The son or prodigy of the mother would be the manifest world, the manifested things. And so it is employing that relationship between these two again to once again sort of given another way, so it's not repeating itself. So you don't get caught up just hearing the Tao is this, the Tao is that. That can become very pedantic. And so reminding, thank you, reminding the reader that this is the relationship the Tao has with the manifest world is part of the language choice here. But I also think it is because this is a very somatic chapter. That passage in the middle about closing the apertures and shutting the gates, or opening the apertures, is directly related to the idea in Chinese thought, especially traditional Chinese thought, of how energies enter or leave the body. And so closing off those unnecessary, we could think of them as unnecessary stimulations, the noise that can come from the ears, the sparkling lights of the big city, closing those apertures is what allows one to not face hard living, leaving them open, and you let the bustle of life flood in. And so the fact that this is such a physically grounded chapter, I think, is part of the reason for going back to that physical allusion or metaphor of the Tao as mother and the manifest world as son is an apt way of translating zi, but it could just also mean offspring or prodigy.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've noticed in most of the translations, that they the word child or something else along those lines is used, or children. Laura, followed by David.
I was going to think of something a little bit more perhaps mundane, but mother nurturing as a nurturer. I mean, there has to be some of that in nature, and nurture and child and rebirth, opening and closing, sort of the beginning and ending of, moments in time, where each being a transitional point as one grows. So just sort of random thoughts around that. But after what Aman just said, forget it. I just said,
Interestingly enough, I'll just insert a comment here. It was just somebody in the chat put Christian is the father. I think it was Katie that put something like that in the chat. And they talked about something I had read about this particular passage is that how Taoism, and feel free to comment or and Aman if you find this to be accurate or not. Taoism differs because females play a more important role in humanism than males. The point may not have been well understood in modern feminist research. Perhaps philosophically or religiously, Lao Tzu could have been seen as one of the first proponents of feminism in human history. It was just a.
I'll respond to that. I do think that suffers just slightly from presentism.
Okay.
There's no way to deny that China was a patriarchy through and through and through and through and through.
Right.
But I would say there are definitely proto elements of, if not a feminism, a consistency within Taoist thought to observe the neglected, to pay attention to what is often in the background. And that by default included females, women in general. Though I would say, if anything, there's probably a greater deal of respect within Taoism for the feminine than you see in almost any other philosophy I can think of or any other religious tenet. You do get some feminist figures who arise out of this strain of thought. Ban Zhao, one of the ladies who in the Han Dynasty wrote Admonitions for Women, which was this little how-to book on how to be a woman going from her birth home into her marriage home. And it is filled with what we would read as very sort of submissive, very deferring, very of its ilk. But she adds one tiny little spin in the end there, which is women should be educated. And she points out that this is traditional, that traditionally we want to have a partner who will be a good match for their husband. And you can't have a highly educated, highly intelligent husband have basically a nincompoop for a wife, is her argument. Right. And I have heard scholars who point to this as, this is Ban Zhao's very Taoistic spin within the Confucianist value system that she just lets slip in there so subtly. So if not feministic itself, it definitely inspired a begrudging willingness to respect the purview of women within China amongst those who weren't Taoist, and amongst Taoists, probably the greatest amount of, I wouldn't say reverence, but a degree of equanimity. Taoist nuns were as common as Taoist priests and still are to this day, and can hold as high and as legitimate of stations.
Interesting. Thank you for that. And I kind of felt the same way, that it did suffer from from some presentism, in the sense that just the way it was interpreted, because it is a male-dominated culture, but it was not interesting nonetheless. Thank you for those comments. So we have kind of a long line. We have David, followed by Allison, then Mike.
Yes, thanks. And first, again, Aman, congratulations again. I hope pregnancy goes well for your just son or daughter, which is hopefully it goes smooth for them. The
daughter, thank you.
Interested, as you mentioned, Joseph, about this closed and open holes. I mean, well, first of all, about this, as we've discussed so many times, that this is a advice to the court or a king or a prince, and how to interpret it that way. I was thinking of these closed and open holes in terms of a closed and open society and closed and open kingdom, and because it just seemed interesting to me. Or, I mean, to talk about this, I mean, it seems so almost negative in these things that, to close yourself out, shut all these doors, close everything else, you'll be, your life won't labor, it'll be, you won't have troubles. If you open things up, then you add the troubles. I don't know if that relates to, as we've, the, outsiders, outside influence, outside knowledge, which brings, as we've talked about, so many times in other parts of the 52 living ideas of chaos and order, and if this is bringing in, chaos, outside ideas to the society, concerned about that, and still at the end that, I mean, it seems so much of a warning, that discernment, perceive the small, focus on, this is what strength is, this is what discernment is, these are what ideas are, and if you give up these ideas, that misfortune is going to come. So I mean, it very much seems like sort of like this admonition, and this very scary in certain ways for this central section, which and again, as we've discussed so many times, how it's important to have this balance. It seems, I guess what I'm saying is, it seems sort of unbalanced compared to what we've discussed in other, about the Egyptian society, Sumerian society, all these others, where you need to go outside and have this balance with external information. This, I guess I'm not trying to impose, my thoughts about, China, which I know much less than Jason Amon, but it seems like almost sort of warning the rulers to, keep, foreign ideas out, keep foreign things, close everything up, and everything will be peaceful if you allow anything unusual in. If you open the holes, if you, meddle in affairs, then it'll be very troubling, and not any of the positives of new ideas of change. So that's just, I'm just curious how the how this would be interpreted by a prince or a king, or or the the court, if this was advice to them, or meant as a subtle advice to them.
Yeah, that was something that last week that actually changed my whole. Amon, actually, do you want to comment?
Oh, no, I was going to give the really simple, true answer, which is I don't know.
Oh, okay.
There are too many princelings in Chinese history, too many opportunities for reinterpretation to say that it could have been understood in just one way. I'm sure at different points it was, and China was a much more open society at often than it is viewed historically. But at this time, not what we would think of necessarily as cosmopolitan. And so there could be an element of that there. But the true answer is, yeah, I just don't know.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, David, because it brings another perspective to how to look at this. And I looked at it from from my perspective, it was more or less choose your words carefully, and to speak carefully, and not necessarily speak unnecessarily, and to maybe not give in to things like gossip. That's how I looked at it, because those are the things that end up troubling you. But it's a matter, the audience really does matter, and how you interpret this. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. Not going to talk too long because we have such a long line here. So I have Allison, followed by Mike, followed by Katie.
I was kind of confused at first because I felt like the first two stanzas seem almost like a different poem from the second two stanzas. But then the thing that I came across that kind of struck me was the line where it says, to recognize your insignificance is empowering. And I thought that really kind of connected to the idea of the mother and the child, because, like when they're saying that when you recognize that you're a child, you will stay close to your mother so she can keep you safe. So sometimes it seems like almost like in weakness, there's strength. Like if you recognize that there are others who know more, others who can take care of you, others who have power, that actually empowers you. When you think you know everything, then you don't really know everything. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
So that's where I saw that connection. The other thing that I do want to say about, the idea of China being a patriarchy, women have always had more power than people give on. I mean, I was thinking about the Empress of China, and I think women have always had ways of influencing the men in their lives, and men have always needed that in a way, or wanted that. They wanted the advice. They may be ruling, but they're going to turn to their wives for advice. It's just sort of like on the surface, it looks like they're in charge. I mean, Bill and Hillary Clinton is another example. But I think you can look at kings and emperors and leaders throughout history, and even when it was always the men, the women had a way of, getting their ideas across. And I think the men also wanted that. They wanted that partnership between them. It was just sort of like, not formal, but it's always been there, I think, in every culture. That's just my 2 cents.
Thank you very much, Allison. Next up, I have Mike.
I took something of a literal takeaway from the first stanza. When it says, knowing the mother, we can know its children. My mom would constantly say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. That was a big one. Another thing she said a lot was, show me who your friends are and I'll tell you who you are. And I kind of grew up hearing that. And then a little later in the poem or the verse, when they talk about stop up the holes and shut the doors, you can finish your life without anxiety. So my mom had 2 sisters who never married, never left the house. One was highly educated, self-educated. The other was, ironically, really, really anxious, never leaving the house. But my aunt, who had done so much reading, didn't want to leave the house because she was afraid of danger that she thought she found lurking in the books that she read. And my other aunt, just fed off of what my aunt told her. And I always found it kind of interesting that it was, they really lived a life in fear while they kept themselves in the house. So they kind of thought the house was going to keep them safe, but it didn't really work. So it's almost opposite of what I read in the poem. That's what they stayed home, they shut the doors, they didn't go out, and yet they kind of lived with a lot of anxiety. So that was my takeaway.
Interesting. Very interesting. Thank you. Katie.
Yeah, the first point I was going to make was basically now echoing what David was saying, putting it in the context of advice to the rulers at the time. And then my second comment, since David already made that point, would be it's interesting, like their view of leadership, because I think this is definitely like I'm reading the second half of the chapter, and I'm thinking that's great advice for people, just kind of worrying about yourself, worrying about, I mean, for me, at least personally, like worrying about being a good person is like enough to worry about it. I feel like I don't have leftover energy to be worried about what other people are doing. But I think I'm surprised that they have like this view of leadership, because we might have like a different view of leadership. Like we might want a president to be strong in the face of danger, or judge and show what we stand for, versus here this is more like advice that for me like resonates with me on a personal level, as like someone in my own life, like let go, judge yourself, worry about yourself, don't ask too many questions. I think that's good advice for an average person, but it's different from what we might how we might envision leadership here.
Thank you, Katie. Next up, we have Madeline. I want to come back to Mike's point at some point.
Okay, well, I think I'm off more in the cosmic realm than everyone else, and possibly misinterpreting just based on the translation that I have. So we have the beginning of the universe is the mother of all things. Knowing the mother, one also knows the offspring. So the the gist that I get from this is that once you are in touch with the fundamental Tao, then the things of the world won't surprise you as much. You will sort of know them in some way, because those are the offspring of the Tao. And getting involved in the world, opening your mouth, always being busy, things will seem sort of hopeless. But if you, okay, so the penultimate lines in my translation say, using the outer light, return to insight, and in this way be saved from harm. So using the outer light, return to insight. The outer light would be the sons or the offspring. The insight might be the Tao or maybe the yin. And so using what's outside of you to keep returning to your internal self and the Tao that is within you, sort of like kind of wandering off into another meetup, but sort of like the Atman. And in this way, being saved from harm, it's not saying that you'll be saved from harm in the world necessarily, but maybe the harm that you're being saved from is being over-involved in the world, talking all the time, always being busy, and kind of missing out on the fundamental peace that would come presumably from always being in touch with what comes at the beginning of the universe.
So, and essentially, you're preventing yourself from harming yourself. Essentially, you're not harming yourself by following the Tao in this particular passage that you just read, which mine reads a little bit differently that I'm reading it. It's, use the way's light, return to its insight, and so keep from going too far. And it's kind of this temperance that we have as a way of actually protecting ourselves. That's the way I would kind of see that.
Yes. It seems to me like what it's talking about is a way of using the energy outside of yourself in the world to keep returning to your own inner center.
Interesting. Thank you. So next up, I have Laura. Oh, you have to unmute, Laura.
Yeah, I think it's a combination. It's sort of seems like a way of telling a person how to sort of guide themselves through life, just kind of checks and balances kind of thing. I get the feeling in some way. But anyway, I had a different thing I just wanted to ask. Given the way it seems that Chinese culture was, how did they wind up being who they are today? Is that just because of communism that they've become so shuttered, so closed, so, women don't have much of a role in society for the most part?
That's a great That's a great question, and I'm sure
What happened to it all?
And Aman will hopefully enlighten us. Go ahead, Aman.
I'll tackle it. 5,000 years happened to China to get them to where they are today. But in the modern times, what really happened was their experience of colonialism. They were the richest, largest, most affluent empire in the world for a millennia. And in the space of less than 100 years, they became an impoverished source of carrion. They were just food, lambs to the slaughter for a very long time. The communist revolution was, amongst other things, groping for an answer or response to that. And in many ways, they treated it as a successful response to that, whether or not it actually was. Today, there's this hybridism of trying to still be traditionalist, hold to what traditionally worked, i.e. communism, while at the same time, like I've said before, couching innovation in tradition is probably one of the most Chinese of Chinese characteristics ever. So every innovation that has happened, particularly within the last about 40 years or so, is always pointing back and saying, no, we're not dishonoring our tradition. We're not veering away from it. In fact, we're doubling down on it. But one of my teachers used to say, as a small joke, she thinks that picture of Mao on the Forbidden City wall gets just 1 square inch smaller each year she goes there, until someday it's just going to be a wallet-sized photo. It'll still be there, but it's just not what it used to be. As far as equity amongst the sexes go in China, in many ways, they were well ahead for a time. And it was actually after the Mongol invasion and the ensuing dynasty that it returned to a much more sort of patriarchic, much more subservient culture. Chinese women were one of the first in the world to be able to join the military, and that was compliments of the communist revolution. All were equal in that quote unquote framework. So you have this really unusual mishmash happening of conflicting ideologies that exist within China that are harmonized by sheer force of will. If it doesn't seem to make sense, it does, because that's just how we do it. And like a Chinese buffet, take what you want from it, but you can leave the rest behind. It's all there for someone to enjoy. I think the Chinese people are much further ahead than the government, and this is my editorialism, but I do believe Chinese people are enamored, fascinated, and happy to be part of the world community. It's the Chinese government that has still a great deal of suspicion and misgivings about the Western world, because they have very long memories about things like the Opium War.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
That was fascinating. And so, yeah, that's fascinating. Actually, one of the series here, and I'll put it in the chat, that Shrikant hosted with Mark Stallman, actually covered some of these issues, specifically in its relationship of how technology is impacting China, yet it's still returning to some of its Taoist roots in some ways. So I'll post that in the chat. Thank you for that, Aman. So next up, I have Yogeshwar.
Hi.
Hi, how are you doing?
I just wanted to point out Madeline's point, actually. I think we are all in the world, and we really get scared when something from outside disturbs us. So we try to change what is outside. And sometimes we forget what we have inside ourselves, and it's infinite. So to solve the outside, we are only looking for outside solutions. Maybe what they're saying here is we should look for some solution which is inside us. And there was one thing in Mike's translation whereby the greatest strength is flexibility, and you get enlightened when you know the subtle. So about the flexibility, I just wanted to say that that's a great analogy in a way that really when we say get strong, man, so it's like you should be flexible to change. That's the strength, not getting rigid. And about the sea, like there's an analogy about the sea, like the great sailor is not the one who can take the boat just in one direction. He has to go by the waves. If the waves are going to the right, he has to slightly tilt to the right and then take it to the course. He can't just be like, I have to take it straight and straight. So the world is like a whole ocean, and we have to be that much flexible to get in the world.
Thank you, Yogeshwar. Very, very insightful comments there. Kevin.
Thank you, Joe. First, thank you, Laura, for the question, and thank you, Aman, answer. And
Yes.
for me, I live there in 2019, last trip over there. I live there 30 years, almost. And so the change is dramatic. I tell you current status about a woman. Let's say, if they before married, the man side pay dowry, right? Dowry for the bride side to the bride side, the man side to the woman side. It's you pay, you need a house, a car, you know, the money, any. That's one side. After marriage, generally speaking, the ladies control the finance. You see the power in the family side. Forget politics, main media, please. If you want to, you know, let's see curiosity, let's search. Even some lots of Western people live in China. Those YouTubers, there's lots. You can search from different view. They physically live there. They can give you better view, could be. If let's see some of the, yeah, that's one angle. Anyway, back to this chapter. I want to see is, so if chapter 42, we see the Dao generate 2, 2 generate 3, 3 generate all things. Who is mother? Mother could be Dao here. And who is the son? All things, sons and things. So that's big scope. I'm going to brainstorm, use different angle, understand it. The first, Dao could be general, and the specific could be son. When as one instant of sun, when it doing move forward, when you look back, what's original? It's kind of, if you consider nature is nature mother, then nurture is our specific for our individual. Then we come back, we keep going forward, one way. We never think about it back. That's why from the society central, yeah, basically 52 living idea I mentioned lots. How can we return the source, find the source? And also, you kind of see the loop between the mother and son relationship. They see the, if you hear the cup, don't repeat, you see, you need to look back at the mother. Even you, let's see, your success. I'm going to, by the way, I also post one, the dragon and clothing and dragon. That's in China, it's called 通假字, using one character interchangeable. Let's old days use that. Then modern day use another word, replace. The meaning basically changed. So it's like I must say 5-7 years. It's lots change. We have, it's good things. We have different taste, understand. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I really like the connection with verse 42 as
And
well.
I
Okay.
just have to chime in and say that Kevin's spot on. The best Irish pub I've ever been to in my life was in Shanghai.
Well said. So next up, I have Katie, followed by Brian or Penny.
Yeah, I think in an earlier chapter we had focus on integrity, not on reputation. So that's another instance of judgment. So like integrity would be how you act, and then like your reputation would be how people are judging you for your integrity. Now in this chapter, it's the other way. They're saying like you know, don't you judge them. So I think like it's kind of like there's a focus is a little bit on like focusing on internals rather than the externals. I think that's like but from the other direction.
Great point. Next up, I have Brian
Oh, it's Penny this time.
or
I
Penny.
had
I'm sorry.
a question because I think because we've been studying the Gita, and as I looked at part of this, they're talking about the mother, great mother, and then her children, and the children having qualities of the mother, and the mother protecting them even if they die. And in the end, my verse says, use your inner light to guide yourself, basically, regardless of the danger. And that's called being constant. And it reminded me a bit of the idea, that the Hindus have that, like the all-encompassing world, and that you're always, you have a spark in you that's always going to exist and be part of the whole big universe. And I didn't know if the Tao had any similarity to that people thought somehow that they were part of the universe and would always be part of the universe, even if they died.
I don't know the answer to that question, but Amon may.
I have a very hard time answering that without going very pan-Chinese, because there isn't a single orthodox view of Taoism. Having said that, probably one of the more common iterations or understandings or interpretations of an afterlife is that the essence of a person is multifaceted, and some of those facets may be retained. The more yin of them, the more yang of them will be dissipated like a drop of water back into the ocean. There's actually names sometimes referred to as the different parts of the soul, the Huan, the Shen, the Yu. These are ideas that aren't necessarily everywhere in Taoism, or even everywhere amongst Taoists, and certainly not necessarily within all of Chinese culture. A lot of the sort of afterlife and funerary culture of China has its roots in Taoism, in Confucianism, but going even further back just to pure ancestry worship. And that still maintains, even in Taoist temples today, you will see forms of ancestor worship enacted in one form or another. So the only thing I could say that is pretty ubiquitous amongst Taoists is that, yeah, there might be something more. We can't know for certain, but we're gonna play it as if there is, because there's nothing wrong with doing that. We don't lose anything by hedging our bets that way. That's the best way to answer that, unfortunately, without some very, very sort of long and convoluted discourse.
No, thank you. And thank you for that question, because it's an interesting parallel that you're drawing. And we're kind of trying to really see the connections between these three great works, whether it be the Bible, the Gita, or the Tao.
Something more like a soul would be indicative of the Gita and Hinduism in the idea of the Atman, thou art that. There isn't necessarily an expression of that within Taoism, no essentializing of a person down to a thing. But it's also not as discontinuous as Buddhism, that makes the Ananatman claim that there is no essential self. The course with Taoist would be reduce that essential self to a point where it is just enough to engage with the world. So not elimination of the ego, but wearing it down to just as much as you need to drive to the store.
Thank you for that. So Are there any other comments about verse 52? I really liked the feedback from everyone. It was excellent. I get more out of it than I definitely give. So Brian, Brian?
Yeah, I did chime in because, I saw another, I could call it a parallel with the Gita because some of these topics have come up recently there. But I see in trying to relate these, the different parts of this verse, I see in each of them a focus between a single point and then a diffused point. Kevin touched on this, I think, and others as well, but I mean, Kevin more directly, that the mother is one, it's the whole, it's the origin, and then that gave rise to everything else, the all or the alls, or different ways of talking about that, but all the different manifestations. And so to enhance our understanding, we concentrate on the one, which was at the origin. And then we realize, well, we also are one of the many, one of the all. We are one of the children of the mother. So we can also understand ourselves by focusing on that central point. The same, I think, comes through in the other verse where concentration rather than diffusion, a rifle shot rather than a shotgun approach to life, in keeping to yourself more, I guess, and keeping more in that way more focused rather than opening up to all outside and in that way kind of random and diffused influences. So I saw a tie there between in terms of understanding, how to understand, concentrate your focus on the one thing, and then how to live, concentrate your focus on the one thing, the center, not the so many diffused and random things that are going on.
That's really interesting. I'm gonna let Kevin comment here in a minute, but that was a very interesting explanation as seeing, the mother as the all, and then how we understand ourselves being part of the all in that relationship. That's kind of a circular relationship that we have with each other, and seeing. And I thought of something with, that I was spoken to Shrikant about in the past, is the idea of the Indian God, where you kind of see God in every person, and that with this relationship that seems to exist, since the mother of the universe, we're all part of the universe. That connection with nature kind of allows us to see us being part of God in a way, or see a little bit of God in everyone. That's just that's my thought on that matter, but could be completely wrong. Thank you, Brian. Kevin, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Joe. I would say this: we focus ourselves as human beings too much, too long. So you think about even this year, we got a lot started. Last week, I guess, we have 29 seconds, right? In US, it's a storm. It's just destroy some area. In the summertime, New York, then one main city in China, it's Zhengzhou, the subway is just tear down. So we need to learn how to cooperate with nature, not ourselves still fighting each other. So especially we focus ourselves, individualism. That's chapter talk about this, obviously. Where's mother? When we ask to be a son, we go far, far away, be strong. Doesn't matter how strong, you come back to motherland. Doesn't matter how strong you are. if you don't think about, you always on a dangerous place. You always think about you're on danger. If you think back the nature, you so calm. That's your yoga, and focus on breath, one in, inhale, one exhale. That's it. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Great comments. Folks, if anybody has any more comments, then if not, we're going to go on to verse 53. Okay, just type exclamation point to read your favorite version in the chat. Dave. Thank you. You're on mute, Dave.
Yeah, like I said, it's been a while. Chapter 53, were I to have the least bit of knowledge in walking on a great road, it's only going astray that I would fear. The great way is very level, but people greatly delight in tortuous paths. The courts are swept very clean, while the fields are full of weeds, and the granaries are all empty. Their clothing richly embroidered and colored, while at their waists they carry sharp swords. They gorge themselves on food, and on the possessions and goods they have plenty. This is called thievery, and thievery certainly isn't the way.
Thank you, Dave. I'm sorry, what version was that?
Yeah, this is the translation of Robert Henricks that has very authoritative and has some very nice comment or footnotes I'm going to comment on pretty soon.
Great, thank you. So next up I have, I think it's Laura. Oh no, actually, I'm sorry. After Dave, I have Evanique. I'm sorry.
No worries. So mine is God as Nature Sees God, and it's by Roger Mabry. So chapter 53. If I possess even a little wisdom, then while I walk in the light of the Tao, my only fear is that I'll fall into doing. The path of the Tao is obvious and simple, but most people prefer to take shortcuts. The courts of law are far from the people's hearts. The fields are full of weeds, and the storehouses are empty. But look, here are officials in elegant apparel, carrying sharp swords, eating and drinking until they are bloated, possessed of such wealth that they could never use it all. I call this positively criminal. It is not the way of the Tao.
Thank you, Evanique. Laura.
Okay. I'm going to do Wayne Dyer. And it's, if I've ever seen just a little sense, I should walk in the great way, and my only fear should be straying. The great way is very smooth and straight, and yet the people prefer perfect, devious paths. That is why the court is corrupt. The fields lie in waste, the granaries are empty. Dressing magnificently, wearing a sharp sword, stuffing oneself with food and drink, stuffing oneself with food and drink, amassing wealth to the extent of not knowing what to do with it is being like a robber. I say this pomp at the expense of others is like the boasting of thieves after looting. This is not the Tao.
Thank you, Laura.
You're welcome, Joe.
Next up, I have Mike, followed by Brian or Penny.
This translation is from Charles Muller, verse 53. If I had just a little bit of wisdom, I should walk the great path and fear only straying from it. Though the way is quite broad, people love shortcuts. The court is immaculate, while the fields are overgrown with weeds, and the granaries are empty. They wear silk finery, carry sharp swords, sate themselves on food and drink, having wealth in excess. They are called thieving braggarts. This is definitely not the way.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. So Brian or Penny, followed by Marco.
This is Stephen Mitchell. The great way is easy, yet people prefer the side paths. Be aware when things are out of balance. Stay centered within the Tao. When rich speculators prosper while farmers lose their land, when government officials spend money on weapons instead of cures, when the upper class is extravagant and irresponsible while the poor have nowhere to turn, all this is robbery and chaos. It is not in keeping with the Tao.
Thank you,
That was
Penny.
really amazing.
Marco's next.
This is the Jiafu Feng. Sorry, not sure if that was already read.
I don't believe it was actually.
If I have even if I have even just a little sense, I will walk on the main road, and my only fear will be of straying from it. Keeping to the main road is easy, but people love to be sidetracked. When the court is arrayed in splendor, the fields are full of weeds, and the granaries are bare. Some wear gorgeous clothes, carry sharp swords, and indulge themselves with food and drink. They have more possessions than they can use. They are robber barons. This is certainly not the way of the Tao.
Okay, thank you. Aman, do you have Jason's? I have a version of it, if you want to walk us through.
I do have a version of it. I don't want to share this one just because it's still in the back and forth state. And
Okay.
And it's short and I can read it. This one doesn't have quite as much. I love this chapter. I love this chapter because I can almost picture a teacher and his young princeling pupil walking away from a court event after having to smile and nod, and this being the very terse lesson on the walk back to his room, that he turns to him and says, "If I know a little wisdom, I'll avoid going astray when traveling on the great way. The great way is smooth, but people prefer shortcuts." Sorry.
No problem.
The courts are abandoned, the fields are barren, the barns are empty. The noblemen wear finery, carrying precious swords and indulging in food and drink. Their excesses of wealth are like robbers showing off. This is not the Tao. Big exclamation point on the end of almost every one of these translations I've ever read. And it's probably the least, no matter which interpretation I hear, the sentiment remains consistent. It's saying the same thing. What you have just witnessed is not what it is to be a follower of the Tao. Period. Full stop.
Thank you for that. That was one of the things, and one of the reasons I really wanted to come to this version tonight is it seemed to be really, really consistent across all the translations. I'm gonna read the Ursula Le Guin version. It's titled Insight. If my mind's modest, I walk the great way. Arrogance is all I fear. The great way is low and plain. But people like shortcuts over the mountains. The palace is full of splendor, and the fields are full of weeds. And the granaries are full of nothing. People wearing ornaments and fancy clothes, carrying weapons, drinking a lot and eating a lot, having a lot of things, a lot of money, shameless thieves. Surely their way isn't the way. So everybody could line up for comments by typing exclamation point in the chat, what you got away, what you took away from this particular. Laura. Yeah.
You're on mute, Laura.
You're on mute. Followed by Allison.
I want to just say that I find this to be very prolific, and I think it's amazing how it has described just about every period in history. You know, if you think about it, the Louis of Versailles, you know, the Russian, whatchamacallits before the revolution. What's the family? I can't. Romanov, I think it was. But even in our society today, I mean, and it goes on, and it's going to keep going on in some form or other. Maybe it's not sabers anymore. Maybe it's fancy cars, and you know, who knows? But there, you know, there's things that you can put into it that would still. And so what does that tell us about who we are as a society? If this kind of behavior appears every time, we always have times where there's hunger, there's, you know, people are hungry, there's not enough crop, there's not enough to eat, and yet some people just have such opulence.
And I think this actually warns us against that. So I think that's really,
I know.
It
warns against us, but it's happened, you know, it tells you here at this point in time, when this was written, this is what you have to beware of. And here we are, you know, thousands of years later, and we're still haven't learned that lesson.
Thank you, Laura.
That's my comment. That's it.
Thank you. So next up, I have Allison.
I think what's interesting is how they keep, each version mentions shortcuts. So it's interesting because they're talking about the differences between the great wealth and the empty granaries. But then when it says like that the path is very, it's very plain, but yet people keep taking these shortcuts, which seem like they're not shortcuts at all. They're just these diversions. So it's almost like the silks, the jewels, the weapon, they're all diversions that are taking you away from where you really need to go, which I thought was just a really interesting idea.
Thank you, Allison. Next up, I have, let's see here. Madeline, followed by David.
Yes, I read something very funny somewhere. It was a fake quote attributed to Lao Tzu, which was, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the words, "I know a shortcut." And I wanted to say I appreciate what Laura said. One of the things I've been enjoying about ancient Asian philosophy is how thousands of years ago, on the other side of the planet, people were behaving in the same ways and had the same problems. And it's actually kind of cheers me up when I think of it. You know, it's not as if people were better. You know, it was the same things. So the second part of the poem actually reminded me of the first verse of 46, which goes, "When the Tao is present in the universe, the horses haul manure. When the Tao is absent from the universe, war horses are bred outside the city."
And that reminded you of 46. I'm looking it up, so.
Yeah, that's the first verse of 46, which is in a way, this seems like the same. The first half of that one seems like the same sentiment of the second half of the one we're discussing tonight.
Very good. Yes, you can see a lot of those parallels there. Thank you for raising that. And it is interesting how this seems to be a consistent problem where there's just a certain amount of greed that is kind of, it's almost universal over these generations, or the need to dominate other people, which is why something like the text of the Tao seems still relevant today. It is still relevant today as it was back then. It's what really makes it timeless. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that we've learned our lesson. So next up, I have Dave, followed by Evanique.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. The more I read these, the more I wish I understood Chinese, because the thing of it is, as Jason and Amon have explained to us, when they see the characters, a lot of times there's one character that's in every line. And they say the focus on this is Shen, which is very. So you say in line 2 and 3 literally say, the great way, very level, people very much like torturous paths. And lines 4 through 6 literally read, courts very clean, fields very weedy, granaries very empty. And then the other thing that was very cute is apparently they snuck a pun in here. The thievery that a lot of us have read, they say the Chinese characters is Dao Shui, that's Taohsi. And those characters literally mean that they are both pronounced Dao, the fourth tone. That is, the lines read, this is called Dao, and this Dao certainly isn't the Dao. So I thought that was kind of a cute thing that this thing, if you know Chinese, you pick up on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Evanique.
Yeah, I think I wanted to focus on the one word, which is bloated. Like, and it's talking about in terms of, it says here, they carry chefs who are eating and drinking until they're bloated. Now, everyone knows what it's like to be bloated, and it's miserable. Like, and you always ask yourself, like, why did I do this to myself? Like, really, like, it's not an enjoyable state of being. And I was thinking of that, and I was linking it to greed, right? Because when you're greedy, you're always after the pursuit of money. That's all it's about, or things, or power. And if you look at people like that, they're actually not happy with their lives, no matter how much they have. And I think that's why it's emphasis that is not the way of the Tao, because if you're pursuing these things, you're actually leading a miserable life. You know, you're not happy with yourself. You're looking for things outside of yourself. And you're getting things until they make you miserable. And they use food and drink, but I think this can apply to any amount of wealth. I mean, not any amount of wealth, but when you're getting things just to get them and they're not really useful, and they're good for that moment. And then you're looking around and you're like, what am I going to do with all this stuff? Like, and I think we all can suffer from it. It's not just the extremely wealthy. You know, I think when you have an excess of anything, it's not good, and then you're miserable, and then you realize, like, you know, even like the American lifestyle, like you're in debt because you have all these things that you didn't need, or, you know, you did all these things to impress other people, and eventually, like, that wears away. It's like a high. It wears away, then you're left with the misery of it. So that's what I thought about.
Thank you, Evanique. Brian, then Katie.
Well, I really appreciated what Evanique just said. She kind of said what I needed to hear. It's also what I kind of think, but the reason I needed to hear that is what I'm listening for in all of this is in this chapter here, or this verse, is the verse saying that the Tao is the way things are, or that the Tao is the way things should be. And this follows up on Laura's comment and Madeline's comment, and I think kind of everyone's agreed observation is that this chapter says, wow, this courtly life is not the Tao. And everybody is saying, oh my God, that's the way it's always been. And so when you say it's not the Tao, I think what this verse, I don't know, I'm just listening to try to find out, but what the verse might be saying is it's making the Tao sound like a moral concept rather than a normative concept.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Katie, but then I want to come back to what Brian just said.
Yeah, my point's short. I think we had food and drink before, the same words before, as kind of a metaphor for desires and sort of not worshiping the manifestation. That's my point.
Thank you, Katie. Kevin, then Madeline.
Thank you, Joe. I got a couple words I seen on the chat. It's two words. One is Dao. In the original text mentioned Da Dao. Basically, it's a big road or main road, the way it should be. And here is very interesting. They say the Ming Hao Jing. Ming, the people like a shortcut or side track. Maybe use a nice word would be innovation, right? We like innovate, build tools. You think about it, that's all kind of shortcut. It's help us. We used to use hunting, planning, then we use animals, then slowly use tools, use tractor. Now, even more advanced. This is the way. So we need to think twice, for me, obviously, understand neutrally. We move forward, but we also need to think back. What we, let's see, for example, plastic bags, how hurt us. Clean water year by year, air, right? Our temperature, the sea. We are drop of water in the sea, or we control the sea. So those logic is upside down compared to what we practice and what we have. In other words, following the people like shortcut is Cao. Cao is, if the core, for me, also is government. You see, government play a main role in this, in our society. 剩余, I'm going to put a chat. It's too much focus on order. Anything government cannot control, we consider as chaos. Yes, so we need to think twice. Let's see, we consumer driven. Let's say, I may have one house, two house. I'm talking. We have one house. Somebody may no shelter, no food, no water. Another side, own the land, own the sea. So this dramatic, I see what we consider 2,000 years ago, they look ahead, we got to wider those issues. Thank you.
I mean, I think it is calling out the excesses and the discrepancies in wealth for certain, and it's asking you to change your perspective on the world. Going back to the idea of who this is speaking to as well is really kind of important too. It's speaking to, as we talked about last week and this week, David had brought up, to princes. This would be really important advice for someone that would be living an extravagant lifestyle, to recognize that there are others that are starving in certain cases. But as Laura had mentioned, these things still exist today. And it's really unfortunate.
Yeah, can I say something quick? Then follow.
Please.
Yeah, it's also the consider basic chapter. This crime. It's considered crime or robber. Those people doing this. You think about it, yeah. It's robber from the nature or other folks. However, we consider we have a law, we have order. We consider that's virtue ethic high. You cannot even have 5 houses. You have no 2 square feet shelter. You cannot have you cannot step in. So also you can connect to a last chapter. It's not too far. Last chapter think about it's also think about the general specific. We're going too far. We didn't think about the like I used to, we talk about the ground and figure. We look for figure and a logo. We forget the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. Madeline, followed by Brian.
Yes, I think this is kind of follows on to what Brian was saying. In a way, this it's almost like someone warning someone against the prosperity gospel that we have here in the US, that if you are making money and doing well, it means that you are favored by God and therefore doing something right. And so it sort of follows that if you pray correctly and donate to the church correctly, and this is sort of those mega church rah-rah things I'm referring to. If you do all those things, then money will come. And so I think in a way it's cautioning against that. It seems to be saying, sorry, I was back on the previous one. So it's like he's telling someone young or even someone old, you see everything that they have, but it doesn't mean that they don't have this because they're following the Tao. They have this because they're stripping it away from other people.
That's actually very interesting, how that contrasts this kind of that you've been endowed by God because you have things, versus the idea that you're moving away from God because you have things, like, or, that's an interesting perspective. In the Ursula Le Guin version, she does write in her comments, so much for capitalism. So just a comment that she had made, but this, Brian.
Oh, I just had a quick comment here, because on many of the verses, they give maybe even 5 examples and then he kind of has a conclusion at the end, but this one is like the reverse. Like basically the conclusion is the great way is easy, be aware when things are out of balance, stay centered within the Tao. And then the things that below, I think, are the examples of people preferring the side paths and, getting lost, not following the Tao, not staying balanced. So.
No, I agree with that. That we not only that we want shortcuts and actually in our lives, and that you're right. Where this particular verse really speaks to me all about balance. Aman.
In speaking of that balance, and I think this touches on what was said before about this being done by virtue of stripping it from people. There are those first set of lines. The courts are abandoned, the fields are barren, the barns are empty. These are all public goods. The courts, the fields, the barns, these are all resources that the public is meant to be able to use. And then you get to noblemen wearing finery, carrying precious swords, indulging in food and drink. These are particulars for an individual. And so the emphasis on focusing on individuality and indulging yourself at the expense of others is sort of teased out here. There are a couple of additional layers, though, to the idea of wearing finery. We might say now, in today's parlance, grooming your Instagram feed, trying to appear in a certain way. Carrying precious swords could be conceived of as being overprotective, over covetous, and having security cameras up around your house in a gated community and personal bodyguards and indulging in food and drink. That sort of self-indulgence is something almost everyone can understand when it comes to food and drink, but you can really think of it as excesses of consumption, because it's not just merely the matter that people would gorge themselves. We find that somewhat appalling in today's culture. But you think of that in the context of a world in which the majority of people are barely subsisting and starving. And it goes from being opulence to downright, a brutal act of showing off. You to even be able to utter the words, "Oh, I'm so full, I can't move," would be something the average peasant wouldn't say in a lifetime. And so it has really a disdain and disregard for those who rely on the works of the public, the people for whom those courts are supposed to serve, those barns are supposed to be filled for, those fields are supposed to be planted for. As far as the normative versus prescriptive that Brian was talking about, and how he was pointing out that this happens again and again and again. So isn't it just the human Dao to be this way? In the one sense, yes, it is, because we do keep doing it. And then we keep having revolutions and beheading those people. And so it's a very extreme way of going for balance. And I think the subtler point here is we can get to a balance point without having to allow this sort of, higher echelon 1% to robber baron their way across the land, because you're always going to get a swing of balance. You just don't need it to be so extreme that it comes with pitchforks and torches, which is also very much in keeping with the human Tao. But there's a gentler way and a smoother way, as opposed to these rocky mountain shortcuts that can be so appealing yet so treacherous.
Beautifully said. Yes, I mean, I completely agree with that, in the sense that it shows how things are so out of balance, specifically at this point in time. If you put yourself where most people are not actually even able to feed themselves, and you have this very select few that are able to, that they have access to more than they could ever imagine or to use. That's a very important point to drive home, because again, if you think about the times and how it's written and who it's written for, but there is this consistency that seems to be, we kind of replays itself throughout history. And we see this time and time again, and through revolutions. And it's just like, whenever things swing too far out of balance, we find ourselves going to extremes in one way or another. So thank you, everybody, for your comments. If there are no other comments, then I'm going to go ahead and Madeline.
Yeah, I just had a comment on what you just said, Joe, because it was very interesting. I'm thinking in terms of Taoism. So say things are very out of balance. I don't know if there's anything prescriptive in the Dao De Jing, but should we try to go the other way and be the counterbalance? Not necessarily with torches and pitchforks, or should we just try to go the centered way and hope that things balance out around us? I don't know if I put that clearly enough.
No, I mean, in a way, what is our role versus, what are the role that those have more than enough? And I think what this is saying to me, and Aman, correct me if I'm wrong, is it's a warning to both that, that how people with less will react, and how people with so much need to change their view of the world. So I kind of see it as a message to both classes in how it actually should be interpreted. Evanique?
Yeah, I wanted to attempt to answer that question, and I think it's up to, as an individual, I think it's up to what is inside you. Like, for yourself what is too much, what is excessive, what is as the Tao uses, criminal, right? And so you could change your world to live that way. Like, there's an attempt to do it now with minimalism, people living minimally and using that money for whatever they want to use it for. Some people use it to give it to the poor, some people use it to travel, whatever it is, right? But for yourself. And then I think if you're living true to yourself, other people see it. Like, I think it's like when people have a certain energy, you don't know why, but you're just drawn to them. And it's usually because they have a good energy to them. And it's because they're living a life that is true for them, and you're drawn to that. Now, in terms of community, I think since communities are made up of individuals, you can get together, you can, see the ills of the world and, try to correct it, and I think you see this throughout, prosperous countries where they go and feed the poor and feed the homeless. And they do it because they want to help, and they want to like make the world a better place. So I think in terms of community, you can do it that way too. But I think it's really up to the individual on how they center to themselves. Like, I personally think living like centered, not going extreme either way is the best way. But other people may feel like they need to go to an extreme to prove a point. So I can't judge it for other people. I can just judge it for myself. So I think that's kind of my attempt at answering the question.
Thank you, Evanique.
I was going to say, speaking from the sort of Taoist perspective of what are you to do in all this? My short answer would be attend an auction in a vintage skirt that has more patchwork, more darning, more stitching together to show that it is, not new, just to evoke the point that wasteful consumption is absolutely unnecessary. Probably the most rebellious thing you could do would be to make sure that you're darning your socks and patching your clothes and subsisting well with what you need that is enough, and paying off your credit cards and never using them again. Those would be the great simple acts of rebellion that I think a Taoist practicing Wu Wei in a capitalist society might undertake, and perhaps start a buy nothing group in their neighborhood.
Interesting. I love how you were able to apply that to today's world and in a practical way. Kevin.
Yeah, normally we understand the yin and the yang is immiscible. If you understand yin and yang are inextricable, they cannot leave one another. You think what the seesaw is long or narrow or broad, supported by one single pivot point. That pivot point is a dynamic, though. We keep changing every moment, could be some cases. So you cannot see, you only use one side, forget another side. It's not like, let's see if like for example, our government formed, we need, let's see, two parties. We need the middle pivot point in the judge side, let's Congress. So sometimes not that way. It's work together. It's we are all together, inextricable. So that's my point. Thank you.
I think Kevin was spot on in that the idea that the opulent rich are intolerable beast is something that's somewhat caricatured.
Right.
If everyone in the world was left with $1's worth of currency, the man with $2 would be 100% too much richer than everyone else. That point of what is enough and what is too much is not fixed. It is dynamic and it changes in society. But learning to get a measure for yourself of when enough is enough for you is really what I think is at the heart of this passage. And the abject lesson is those examples are people who miss it.
And the and the ills that come along with that, when we're unable to determine what is enough for ourselves. It's very, very important warning. And it also actually can lead to an incredible amount of unhappiness as well. Not knowing how to temper our desires in general. So I think that's a fantastic point. Does anybody else wish to add anything? If not, I'm just going to do some announcements, and I want to thank Aman for this evening, and thank you for joining us and your comments as always. It's always a honor to have you here, and congratulations. And
thank you all, and Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. I look forward to seeing you all soon.
See you soon. Take care, Aman. I'm just going to do some quick announcements really briefly. I have tomorrow the very best questions on comprehensivity, and that's at 9 p.m. And that's where we have a list of questions. And if you go to the website, you can see them. It's what is the meaning of a comprehensive as you understand it? How have you improved your own comprehensivity over the past year? So there's a whole list of questions that you can go through, and we're going to have a deep discussion about that tomorrow evening. Thursday is the Gospel of John, chapter 5, the Father and the Son. And Monday is then we're off all the way up until Monday. Then that's the Evil of Design, and that's part of the Design Way series. So I want to, thank everybody for this evening. I'm going to stop the recording really quickly, and